In November 1997, Vancouver hosted the APEC summit. APEC is an economic alliance of Pacific Rim countries now negotiating a free trade zone. This massive economic bloc will create trade links between diverse societies, from democracies to totalitarian regimes. The Vancouver summit brought many of these controversial leaders together in North America for the first time. This would set the stage for a Canadian conflict. A conflict between the rights of Canadians to exercise free speech and the federal government's efforts to mute their message. A message about human rights and democracy some of our trading partners would rather not hear.
This is all being filmed. People know what you did.
UBC law student Craig Jones was one of 48 people arrested for pro-democracy demonstrations. He never imagined speaking out for human rights in other countries would lead him to question his own rights here in Canada.
The Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms essentially puts down in writing what's been in the common law for hundreds and hundreds of years, and that is that the citizens in a democracy have the right to express their opinions through whatever means they deem fit. You know, a lot of people have asked me, well, what law says that you can stand on your lawn with a sign? You know, and there is no law except the 500 years of common law. This goes back to the Magna Carta. This is very important constitutional stuff. It's the root of a constitution in a democratic society. The challenges of these events at APEC is that these are super critical rights in society, but the problem is they are rights that we need to invoke because we live in such a great society. They are rights that we need to invoke so seldom that if they're not there when we need them, then they may as well not be there at all. And maybe they haven't been there, and we just haven't been noticing it because we've never needed to invoke them before. Bertrand Russell said we all have our rights in society until we need them, and I think that was the case that we saw here. I was arrested because I stood in the way of a machine that had been designed sometime in advance and needed to steamroll over this route that the motorcade was due to roll through. We had 18 world leaders going to their meeting at the Museum of Anthropology, and there were clearly either direct orders or an environment understood that there would be no protesters visible from the route. And so we saw it as a pretty good opportunity to hang some signs out and let some people read them. We had several signs. I had 3 myself: democracy, human rights, and free speech. The human rights sign was simply pieces of paper laid out on the sidewalk, and the other 2 signs were on rolling metal coat racks sitting on the lawn here. So I was holding my sign in both hands here when the police came back, and when they attempted to pull it away, and I just hung on to it, and then I was grabbed from behind by 3 officers, and I landed on the pavement here with my body over the pavement and my legs hanging up on the sidewalk, and I was handcuffed while I was on the ground and taken away. And no time throughout any of this process did the RCMP officers say that they were worried that our signs could be thrown over the fence or anything like that, and that's one thing that they've said since. Inspector Dingwall has said since that he did tell us that morning, and that's simply a lie. It just didn't happen.
At an organized rally later that day, protesters faced off with police.
Basically, our rally started where the APEC Free Zone had started, in front of the Goddess of Democracy, and it was incredible that we weren't really sure how many people would show up. Just more people came, and by the end of the rally, there was like 3,000 people there.
We walked down towards the police line where the police were headed, and that was when it sort of kind of got crazy.
I mean, it would have been very easy for them to just make arrests as students. Students were essentially bringing themselves forward to be arrested, and they refused to arrest students. They were essentially provoking a confrontation.
And then the media kind of made it look like it was this big riot, and we ripped the fence down, and then the police went off with the spray.
Police! Here to keep...
But the fence came down, the police started spraying, and so everybody kind of backed up and sat down for like at least 20 minutes and sort of talked about what we were going to do, and we decided we were going to go forward in groups of 4 and be peacefully arrested. And we got up there, and the police were like in this big line, and they had their bikes all set up, and this one officer like sort of pushed me in the shoulder and threw me backwards. Then he like hit me in the face a couple times and held my face up like that and then sprayed me in the face directly. And so I kind of bent over because it hurt a lot. And when I bent over, they sprayed my whole back and arm and then grabbed me from behind and like whipped me over this row of bikes and then dragged me on my stomach and arrested me.
A number of demonstrators were singled out by police and taken away. When they reached the local police station, the men and women were separated. The women were strip searched.
It was an open room with no doors, and there was male officers walking by and sitting right there.
This might be the greatest mass sexual assault in Canadian history, and I think this is one of the things that we have to remember, that when police use these sorts of tactics, I mean, these are things that you or I would go to jail for a very long time if we did this. I mean, we give the police these powers to do it, expecting that they will do it only in the most extreme circumstances.
You know, when you talk about world trade or when you talk about politics in the country, it's all something very boring. It's something on paper. It's something that happens out there, right? And sometimes people may go and have protests or whatever, and it's just kind of pushed off to the side. It's not a big deal. But all of a sudden, here was a group of people, thousands of people that said, hold on a sec, let's do something about it. And all of a sudden, you know, you never thought that could happen in this country. You said, no, you have the right to peacefully protest in this country. You have the right to be heard. And all of a sudden, we didn't. All of a sudden, it turned violent. All of a sudden, that stuff that we hear about happening in other countries where you can go out and protest and the police will come after you, even if you're not doing anything illegal or you're peaceful, all of a sudden that happened here, right?
Historically, the citizenry of a democracy has had the ability to use civil disobedience to affect social change. It's been a very powerful, very valid tool in democracy, that you simply weigh down the system with the weight of your bodies. The introduction of pepper spray and other
pepper, I put it on my plate.
Similar techniques means that the police aren't going to simply arrest the people that want to be arrested. They're going to deny them the ability to participate in civil disobedience, and they're simply going to subject them to excruciating pain until they bend to the authorities' will. And I think that's a very definite change in the way that we're treating these protests. And I think it's an indication, perhaps, of the government's frustration with the scale of the protest that's potential. I mean, that they don't want the civil disobedience because that would actually be effective. And they wouldn't be able to deal with it, so they simply have to spray people until they move. And we have to ask ourselves, what assurances were given to Suharto in October in this meeting with the senior officials of the Canadian government, who, according to the Globe and Mail, assured Suharto that he wouldn't be embarrassed by protest if he came to Canada, that protesters would be kept well away from the UBC campus, which was a ridiculous promise to make.
It is unclear whether the RCMP were directed to remove protesters from the view of the passing motorcade. But it is known the PMO's office requested last-minute changes to push back the protest boundaries.
The police officer told me that it was on orders from the Prime Minister's office that there should be no signs and no people along this stretch of the roadway.
I mean, in his year-end speech, he was saying, oh, there were signs all along the motorcade route, you know, everybody saw them, I don't know what these people are on about.
We have given them a chance to protest, and the signs were all along the road, and they knew where the leaders were to pass, and the leaders read it, and that is what is peaceful demonstration.
Just wasn't the case, you know. I mean, I spent 14 hours in jail because I couldn't have a sign along the motorcade route. And I think he's either painfully misinformed or frighteningly disingenuous.
Outraged by the authorities' reaction to the protests, some demonstrators are now suing the Prime Minister, the federal government, and the RCMP for violating their constitutional right to freedom of expression.
When hundreds of police officers go to a university and attack students, it's time for us to seriously question the government that sent them in.
I guess the fundamental lessons to be learned from this is that we've built an extremely successful place to live, and we've built it on fundamental principles of democracy, of free speech, of discussion, even uncomfortable discussion. We have to realize that we're successful in large part because of those attitudes, because of the rights that we have, not in spite of them, and that we're not going to become further successful by suppressing them in order to bring ourselves in line with this global community that we've become a part of.
This is all being